My name is Dr. Sam Osmanagich. For more than 40 years, I've been researching pyramid and megalithic sites around the world. But one site in particular was a puzzle for me. Plain jars of Laos. And that's the reason I had to come here. Right now I'm in Laos, in Southeast Asia. The purpose of thousands of megalithic vessels is unknown, and their origin. Armed with the information from 4 archaeological expeditions in the last 100 years, France, Japan, Belgium, and Australia, we thought that we are closer to the answer as far as the purpose and builders. But something was wrong. They were all saying those jars had something to do with dead people. But they were not burial sites, no remnants below those megalithic vessels or inside. So I was going from site to site until I discovered the answers for myself. It was so simple as many things in our life. It was so logical and it was practical. Those megalithic vessels were not built for dead people, but for the living communities. They were about the most important liquid in our life. I have been researching megalithic and pyramid sites for over 40 years. Today I am in Laos, Southeastern Asia, near the town of Ponsavan. This is site number 1 for the plain jars. Well, of all the miracles I've seen around the world, one of the most mysterious is the one over here. Those megalithic vessels or megalithic jars do not offer us answers to three major archaeological questions: who, how, and why. The fourth one, when it seems that we are getting the answer. Until a few decades back, people thought that the age of jars is about 1500 to 2000 years. But according to the luminescence analysis, which was getting samples from below the jars, exposing the quartz crystals to the sunlight for the first time after a long time, we know that the oldest megalithic jars are 3240 years, and the youngest one 2680 years. Of course, we don't have any recorded civilization from that time. Usually people talk about civilizations in the Middle Age, 1000 years ago, 600 years ago, or a couple of hundred years ago, but not thousands. Who lived in this area more than 3000 years ago? Hard to answer. Now, in the area of Laos, we have more than 2000, according to some 1999 megalithic jars on a great number of different sites. We're talking about 90 different sites, and the number of jars range from 1 to 340, like in this location. As far as the size, it's different. They go from rather small ones to the big as this one behind me, which is called the King Cup. As far as the material, on all different sites, there are 5 different materials: sandstone, limestone, granite, conglomerate, and breccia. So people were using the local material. However, the question is, who was able to move tons and tons of single materials to carve this megalithic jar from one piece? Some of the jars are reaching 6 tons. And the quarry is behind me. It's more than 10 kilometers away. As far as the purpose, on one end there are the local legends who talk about the giants who are using the jars as their cups. We have cup of teas, they think that they were having their cup of teas. Of course, we can disregard this legend very quickly. The archaeological work in the area is almost 100 years old. The French geologist and archaeological amateur, Miss Colony, was researching the area back in 1930, and she was unearthed most of these jars. Her opinion was they were used for the cremation. The modern view is that they were actually used to leave the body inside, which is going to decompose, and later on they would bury it around. And indeed, in some of the areas, especially in the caves, the contemporary bodies were discovered. Well, for me, this is not a scientific argument. Why would somebody make thousands of these megalithic objects move them on vast distances, carve them in a beautiful fashion. Some of them have those lid grooves, but majority of them, they don't. Only one lid was discovered on the jar, tens of them laying around, but majority don't, meaning it was not the original purpose to have a lid. Doesn't make much sense to leave the body, that body, inside and wait to decompose. It would take a very, very long time. And people die all the time. And you would have many, many bodies around. And this is not the case here. As far as the purpose, I have to admit, of all of different miracles around the planet, this is the one that leaves me speechless. I don't see any particular purpose for those jars of different sizes, different dimensions of the holes, different tops. So I would say that was some kind of a tool for advanced megalithic civilization. To place them in Iron Age has an irony. For me, there are two types of civilizations on this planet. The first one is the one that deal with stone. The second one is the one that deal with the metal. So, stone civilizations and metal civilizations. In order to shape this, of course, you had to use some kind of technology. Was it iron? Well, very hard. In some cases, granite cannot be shaped by iron. And even very hard limestone and some of the sandstones, they can be hardly shaped with a rather soft iron tools. So really, most of the questions remain unanswered in this particular case. Megalithic civilizations had used different type of technology. Sometimes it was based on frequencies, ultrasounds, different electromagnetic frequencies. What was the case here? Hard to say before we answer the question, who? So, my advice to everyone who is able to come to Laos is to try to answer those intriguing questions. On one of the megalithic jars here in Laos, Ponsavan, site number 1, and only on one out of 334, there is a carving of a man with a head, hands, and legs. According to some, looks like a frog man, and they're looking for connections with the similar carvings in Indonesia. And then, according to some, it gives us the answer about the original constructors and builders. I disagree, because when looking from top, I can see that the face of the figure and the top are at the same level. So in order to make these carvings, they were carving it in, so they were removing the material from sides, meaning the jar was here already when somebody was showing his or her artistic skills. So they removed this material, but actually original surface was here. So this figure came later. It's very important because this face has nothing to do with the original builders. Only one megalithic jar has this cover, a lid. However, it is not an original lid. Why not? Because the size is much bigger, plus it does not fit. So this cover came much later from the time when the megalithic jars were made. Quarries are important part for every megalithic sites. Where did they find the stone? To shape it and then to move it and build pyramids and megalithic sites. For example, in the country of Egypt, they used limestone and granite. Limestone was present around the Giza plateau, but granite was 869 kilometers away in Aswan. So it was a logistic nightmare. First to shape the hardest material and then to move big blocks. For example, Khafre pyramid, 220-ton block. Cheops, 80 tons. Obelisk in Luxor, 375 tons. In Guatemala, they used volcanic stone to build pyramids. Of course, there are 30 volcanoes in Guatemala, so it is understandable. In Mexico and China, sandstone and granite to build the pyramids. In Bosnia, when they built tunnels, they removed conglomerate, pebbles, stones, and sand. They added melted clay and they got the best quality concrete. Everything was 3-4 kilometers around. In Peru, they used bricks, and bricks were made of clay, sand and water. And here in Laos, near the town of Ponsam, 10 kilometers from the site number 1, where the second largest conglomerate of plain jars are located, we found quarry. This is the largest quarry in the land for the jars. So what they were using the sandstone. So the whole hill is built from the sandstone. And then they were using boulders. Sometimes boulders or big rocks were independent. And when they found the proper size, they started carving around. So they were shaping it. In most cases, it was circular shape. Sometimes it was square shape. The second phase, they were working on the base. Base was always little bit wider than the top. So we are talking about the cylinder shape, sometimes irregular cylinder shape, like the potential jar over there. We see how they started shaping it. The base was wider, the top was more narrow. The third phase, they were working on the top. They needed flat top. So all of the unfinished jars here, they have flat top. They don't have the top ready to be sealed. It tells us a lot. It tells us that those lids came later. The next step, they would start carving it, the first section here, which is about 10 to 15 centimeters. When they carved that, they were making the hollow space inside this stone. And we can see traces of rather rudimentary tools. Probably they were chiseling the material out. However, there were times when they were not careful enough, and then stone would break. Like here, and we can see the half of it broke. And then they would stop, leaving this area unfinished. So now we know where did they find the material for those jars 10 kilometers from here. But we don't know exactly who did it, what kind of tools they used, and most importantly, how did they transport 2, 3, 6, 12 tons from here, 10 kilometers away, and of course the use or the purpose remain a mystery. Sure, Marlene. That's... here I am, site number 3 in Laos. Megalithic jars, vessels. There are 1,999 counted jars of different sizes. Unfortunately, some of them have been damaged. Almost 90 recorded sites, and 14 of them are part of the UNESCO protection. So they have been admitted as the location as UNESCO heritage site, meaning they have become the cultural heritage of the world. They do not belong to UNESCO. They don't even belong to the Laos. They belong to all of us, people who are there to learn about those megaliths. Now, officially, almost 2,000. But how many originally? I would say 2 or 3 times more. What happened to the others? Number 1, number of jars that have not been discovered yet is probably big because they are under the ground, considering the fact their age more than 3,000 years. In the meantime, wind, dust, soil, water, rain, vegetations, they placed a lot of them under the ground. Site number 1, 100 years back, was almost completely under the ground. Number 2, the war destructions. The Second World War, later on French and Indochina wars. The worst, of course, the war in Vietnam, 1964-1973, when 270 million bombs ended up here in Laos, based on orders from Lyndon B. Johnson and especially Richard Nixon. The cluster bombs that were used mostly had ability to destroy everything in a big radius. People, animals, trees, but also jars. And then, after so many years, Mother Nature starts doing its job. And finally, us, people who live here. They would not appreciate the importance of these megalithic sites. So they were using the stone for different purposes. If they were able to crunch them in pieces, they used those pieces to build their houses and the foundations. Or they would ground rice, or they would ground the knives using this stone. So unfortunately, the number of those megalithic vessels in good condition is not big. But what we have is equally impressive. Under the UNESCO protection, you would expect 1 million people here, but it's not happening. I hope in the future the government of Laos will even relax the conditions to get in the country even more. Now you can get it with e-visa and stay for 60 days. I think that conditions to travel will be easy in the future. Instead of using the local airport in Ponsavan, I had to travel by car 10 hours from the capital city of Vientiane. Hopefully 2025 the new terminal will be opened in Ponsavan for the international arrivals, and instead of less than 100,000 people like it used to be in Ponsavan, it will be much more. So the country of Laos will have more benefits from this phenomenon. And hopefully more experts will come with different methods of analysis, dating, and we might even get a true answer to purpose of those megalithic jars. And finally, in order to find out more, I had to go to the spiritual waters. I did my focused meditation, asking the questions who, how, why. And these are the answers. People who lived here thousands of years back, they were like today's people in Laos, very similar in a face, features, but they were not behind building it. Some other people came, instructed them to help them, and they were making thousands of megalithic jars using two types of tools, stone tools and iron tools. They were moving them using the wood. That's the reason why they are rounded, for the easier transportation. They were placing them on top of the flat, hilly areas. There is a reason for that. The areas where there were no vegetations, no trees. And their sole purpose was to collect the water. Water gives us life. Originally, all of them were placed vertically, like this one or that one, with the opening to the sky. By collecting water, that water would become a holy water. Water gives us life. High vibrating water makes us vibrate much higher. And that's the reason why the dust or the leaves or the branches from the trees could not come inside. And they had to be open to the sunlight and to the sun rays. As I can see around the world, majority of the megalithic sites and the most superior pyramids were built not for one dead body or as cemeteries. They were built with very specific purpose, practical purpose for the living communities. So I would say that very specific materials, the water coming from the divine, is the answer. Our vibrations that comes from the water vibration. telling us that this was energy vortex. So we are on energetical, powerful place on top of the hill. This is site number 2 in Laos, megalithic jars. 93 of them are surviving. This is a perfect argument to what I was saying. The jars were placed very carefully on top of the hills. When you come from one side, looking second, third side, you can see the slopes. At one point, this was a flat top. They placed those megalithic jars to collect the water. Specific features of the stones, and most probably underground energy flows, maybe ley lines, would cause the water to vibrate higher in the combination with the sun rays. A holy water. All of them were at one time vertically placed like this one here. Some of them, of course, they've been damaged during the war operations. Some of them, they've been destroyed. But at one point, they were all looking at the sky. They were asking for the more holy water.